Look, we are business people at the end of the day. The better result we get our client, the more likely that client is to then say to their friends or their family, hey, hire Mr. Steinberger or hire Mr. K. He's a great attorney. Why would we ever put ourselves in a position to not get the best result?
Hey there, hot messes. Welcome to Success of a Hot Mess, where we celebrate the art of juggling life's chaos and coming out on top. I'm Stacey Isaacs, your host and resident rock star lawyer, dance mom, and survivor. We're going to dive into candid conversations about conquering challenges, embracing our unique selves, and finding success in the beautiful mess of it all. Welcome, guys, to Success of a Hot Mess podcast. Today I have the pleasure of having Jason Steinberger and Elliot S on the podcast. Both of them do criminal defense in the Bronx and other parts of New York. Let's start with Elliot. Why don't you tell me what your practice focuses on?
I'm happy to be here with you. The practice focuses on criminal defense and what's called false arrest cases, suing the police if they arrest someone when there's no probable cause to make that arrest. Also, which is somewhat related, we do excessive force cases. So if the police during an arrest assault someone or hit them unnecessarily or roughly, we would sue the city on the theory of excessive force.
Okay, and I literally hear like ambulances and cops in the back. Like, is this the sort of place you guys practice in?
This is not uncommon for the sunny South Bronx, but I can't speak for Jason, but I do love practicing here. Never a dull moment. How about you, Jason?
Well, very much like Elliot, I also do criminal defense and civil rights cases, and I think that's probably the best way to classify the lawsuits that we bring against the city of New York and the police department when they violate the rights of our clients, whether it's a false arrest or they use excessive force or they maliciously prosecute people for crimes that they did not commit. And again, thank you so much for having us. You know, you didn't have to create a podcast just to hang out with us. We could have gone out for dinner too.
Maybe you, Jason, but for me to even get a call back from my brother, it requires a podcast setting, to be honest with you. And I hope that Reposada got there today. If not, it should get there later. But Jason, I understand you are a former prosecutor, correct?
That's correct.
And Elliot, you are a former legal aid attorney. So
that is.
You guys were on opposite sides of the courtroom, right?
We've actually been on opposite sides against one another.
No way, really? Who won?
I mean, take a wild guess. Clearly,
I would say that justice was served.
All right, well, let me put it to you this way. I interview a lot of lawyers. I am a lawyer. And most lawyers do not love their jobs, except for criminal defense lawyers. So, Jason, why do you think that is? Like, what is so great about what you do?
Well, I think that practicing criminal defense and civil rights law is very relatable. You're not dealing with very abstract concepts regarding a contractual dispute. You're dealing with real life things that occur to real people. It's very tangible. And we definitely deal with some colorful people too, and that keeps things interesting.
Elliot, why do you think criminal defense makes its practitioners so happy?
I mean, it's probably the most interesting area of law. Every case is totally different. It's not as if you're reviewing contracts and looking at the same things over and over again. In criminal defense, the fact patterns are usually very unique, very interesting. And there's nothing like a jury trial, and a majority or a certain percentage of the cases do get tried in front of a jury, whether it's 6 people or 12 people, and that's one of the more interesting and actually I think the best parts of the job, the intensity of the trial and really fighting hard for someone that was wronged and arrested.
So if someone doesn't like trying cases, would you say criminal law is not the right area?
Clearly.
Right. If you don't like trying cases, then you have no business whatsoever defending anyone's constitutional rights. Because unfortunately, in the state of New York at least, and I'm sure it's very similar in other jurisdictions as well, it takes very little to have someone get arrested, right? We see all the time that it merely takes a phone call to the police or a report to the police that somebody did something. The police very often do not investigate these allegations. They will simply rely on the word of the complainant and make an arrest. The district attorney's office will then prosecute that arrest based on the word of the complainant alone.
And I have,
And you were,
not to cut you off, but I have just a perfect example of that, wherein a client is walking down the street, a lady runs out of the bank and says, "That's the guy that robbed the bank 2 weeks ago." He gets arrested, he spends a couple weeks in jail, then we get the video, and he's not even the same race as the individual in the video that robbed the bank. So, like Jason said, the mere fact that someone tells the police a person did something wrong, the police will make the arrest with no investigation, and that, very often can lead to a wrongful arrest. I mean, the guy in my case didn't even resemble height, weight, race, nothing of the actual robber, and yet he found himself at Rikers Island.
And to that same end, how difficult really was it for you to obtain that video? Could the police have detained him? Possibly. But I would imagine that video was extremely accessible at or contemporaneously with when the identification was made. He could have probably have only been detained an hour or two before he was cleared of any wrongdoing.
Absolutely.
I literally still hear sirens in the background. Is this just a daily occurrence?
Hourly occurrence.
Let me ask you this. Have you ever been afraid of your own client, either of you? Let's say it's somebody up for, very brutal murder.
I have not. The clients, regardless of the charge, are generally relying on you for all the help in the world. And the more serious the charge, probably the more they're relying on you. So I've never been threatened, but I have heard stories, and know one lawyer that had a gun pointed at him by a client that was upset with how things were going. And as you can imagine, the lawyer got off the case pretty quickly. But nevertheless, I have never been threatened, although I have heard stories.
How about you,
I
Jason?
fortunately have never had that experience either. I think like any relationship, it comes down to the expectations that you give of what that relationship is to be. So at the very beginning, and I imagine that Elliot, it's the same way, right? You're not making any false promises to anybody that comes to see you. You try to be as open and transparent as possible. And the more open you are, and the more clearly you set realistic objectives, the more likely that the client is to appreciate what it is that you're doing and how you're going to do it. And if you keep them informed, and you explain to them that your job as an attorney is not to be a magician, but to really present them with information and then allow them to make the determination that's right for them, I generally find that people appreciate that. And look, they may not be happy with the information that you're giving them, but so long as you're open, I think that that's all anyone can ever expect from their attorney.
Right, but real talk, I mean, let's say I have to tell a client, sorry, your case really isn't worth shit. It's like $2,000 at best. They get very angry, they fire me and leave a bad review. Don't you encounter clients when you're maybe presenting a plea deal that, they tell you you're weak, you're not fighting for them?
Well, that certainly has happened, but that would be different than being threatened. Like, I've never had my safety threatened, but I've had clients upset. If a person is not in jail, for example, they made bail, and the offer's 20 years in prison, and you're trying to convey that to them, they might get angry and not threaten you. But I've heard, you're working with the prosecution or stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you just have a conversation with them and let them know.
Right. I've always found that so laughable when a client says, I've actually never been accused of that. I tell them, hey, look, I used to be on that side. I left. I'm certainly not looking to work with them against you. If I wanted that, I'd just be a prosecutor. But, I mean, it would serve no purpose whatsoever for a defense attorney to work in cahoots with the DA to screw someone over, right? Look, we are business people at the end of the day. The better result we get our client, the more likely that client is to then say to their friends or their family, hey, hire Mr. Steinberger or hire Mr. K. He's a great attorney. Why would we ever put ourselves in a position to not get the best result?
But if you're representing hundreds of people over the years, you are, as a matter of course, going to have some people that might have unrealistic expectations and say some things that can't possibly be true. But when people are upset, especially at the prospect of going to jail, which does happen in some cases, they may, want to vent. But, having a talk with them and explaining the situation usually, will satisfy them.
So before we get to some of the fun stories, I find the dynamic with you two, and I think there's a couple other guys, you all do the same type of law. You're all on your own, and you all share space. How do you avoid the competitive nature of your business?
It's a great question for Jason.
Well, look, like any fraternity, right? Our space only works if everybody deals with each other at arm's length. I mean, when you work on your own and you don't have an office environment that so many people have, and you don't have the water cooler talk or you don't have that banter, it gets pretty boring. And so I think that everybody in our space appreciates, the friendships that we have. And it's very rare that there are issues.
Right, but I know that your office is right by the courthouse, correct?
Yes.
Let's say somebody rolls out of jail or court and walks into your building. I need a criminal lawyer who sues the cops, like you.
If they haven't showered after they got out of central booking, that's Elliot's client.
I would welcome that person.
But, how do you just stay off each other's, it's like prostitutes sharing the same block, basically.
I think very rarely do people in the modern era where everyone has access to a cell phone, do people really walk into the office. For the most part, people will reach out to us, and there are communications between us and the prospective person coming to meet with us where, I'm sure Elliot works very much like I do, where I send a text with my name and my address, and they very often will have to look at the phone, mispronounce our names, and half the battle is trying to figure out, if they're saying Elliot or Jason.
Okay,
you
fair
don't
enough.
get many walk-ins for criminal defense. People do.
But it also seems, it seems like at least you, Elliot, don't really do advertising. Is it all word of mouth?
Almost all of it is word of mouth, but, we've been doing this, both Jason and I, probably over 20 years. So at some point, clients, if you do a good job, will tell their friends or relatives, and then it mushrooms out. So basically, it is word of mouth. In the beginning, I advertised, but at this point, it's a lot of just referrals from other clients.
Jason, how about you?
I think it really comes down to this. I think at some point we've all flirted with advertising, but these days, people are going online to find an attorney, and they care about their freedoms, right? They're most likely not going to find the attorney that they are going to find is right for them without consulting a friend or a family member or something like that. What Elliot and I do, without glorifying it, is too important to risk for someone that they have no connection with and someone who is willing to undercut fee-wise the last lawyer that they got off the phone with. So when someone says to me, how much are you going to charge me for this? Another lawyer was going to charge me that. I say, go with the other attorney. Because that attorney, if he's willing to only charge you that fee, probably doesn't have the kind of business or doesn't offer the same services that I would offer. And you get what you deserve, much like anything else in life.
Well, you get what you pay for. I'm a firm believer in that.
Get what you pay for, right. Not you get what you deserve. Well said.
Right. Okay. So obviously we won't talk about specific details or your clients' names and all that, but is there a story
Sounds like you're
about...
looking for something salacious. Is that what you're leading up to?
Yes, the more salacious, the better, but which one of you wants to tell me about a client or a client's girlfriend that left blood all over the walls and hair in your office? Do you know what I'm referring to?
Well, it seems to me like you're making an allegation. Do you have any substantiated proof to support?
Just word of mouth, just hearsay.
Elliot, do you want to
Sure,
chime in? I remember you hiding behind the door,
Well-
and I was hiding behind two doors.
Right. Well, all I can say that I observed while I was in my own office, I heard screaming. And then I thought I heard maybe Jason yell or raise his voice. So I thought I'll go look out and maybe help Jason and get him out of whatever circumstance this is in. So
Wait, did you hear women screaming or men screaming?
There was a man and some women, but it was the women screaming. But Jason, I could tell the sheer terror in his voice as he was saying, calm down. So as I opened my office door, no sooner than maybe a half a second, Jason sprinted in and yelled for me to call 911. And why don't you pick up the story from here?
Wait, I remember this, that 911 never answered, right?
Well, I did try calling 911 because there were two people fighting in our office and, blood like streaking across the wall. So I thought 911 would be the way to go, but
Most people would expect that when you call 911 that they answer and that they respond in a timely fashion. But
Not in the Bronx.
As you've heard in the background, there are a lot of sirens that happen here. This is a very dense population. And so while I would like to believe that the police are always looking to do the right thing, they probably are stretched very thin. To that end, I had a client that was merely coming to sign paperwork and was escorted by what appeared to be a female friend. Unbeknownst to us, there was another female friend who was following him. And after I had let him and female friend number 1 into the office, female friend number 2 came in and was none too pleased to see female friend number 1 with their mutual friend. What ensued can only be described as chaos that left a lot of fake hair on the floor and unfortunately blood stains in numerous parts of the office.
Is there still blood stains in the office?
That's really a question for Elliot
Wait,
and perhaps our other friend Stacey.
The best part of the story is that there was another client of mine that had nothing to do with this fight and just was sitting in the office waiting for her turn to meet. And she wasn't fazed at all that she was sitting 3 feet from a fist fight with hair all over the place, blood on the walls. And this client of mine just sat there as if it was a regular day.
Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, you seem like both strapping, men. Why did you not go and try to rescue this poor innocent woman sitting there? She chose to stay. numerous times we begged her to run into our office.
That's
She said,
true.
"No, I'm good."
Yeah.
Are you serious? But Elliot, why didn't you bust out some of those wrestling moves from
No,
1985?
I generally will only bust out the moves if I'm wearing my singlet. And
Okay,
that
fair.
was at home. I was actually being dry cleaned at the moment.
Wait, is that much like a leotard?
It is
Similar.
100% a unitard. But I just, it definitely sounds interesting. There's got to be, Jason, do you have a story to share that you overheard coming from Elliot's office? Anything crazy?
No, you know what? Elliot really has a much calmer demeanor than I do. And
Than I do as well.
think, again, he probably sets a different tone. Perhaps when people come into the office to see me, they seem agitated.
How,
But
how do you
no,
characterize? your-
look, at the end of the day, there's not that many shenanigans that go on around here because I think, again, people are coming to us for help and people are in a very desperate situation, whether it's a financial situation where they're looking to be compensated or, their liberty is being threatened. And so for the most part, again, while our clients are definitely colorful and probably lead different lives outside of the office than we all might lead, I think they take these concerns very seriously.
Very PC answer. Elliot, what were you going to say?
I would say there's more shenanigans, if you will, or crazy stories that happen in the courtroom. For instance, there was a trial going on, a robbery trial, where it was the senior lawyer, probably in his 50s, and then the second seat, a new attorney in his 20s, and they were seated at the defense table, and they were representing an individual who was sitting in the middle, charged with robbery. So the older lawyer is asking the victim of the robbery to pick out the perpetrator of the crime, and sure enough, the supposed victim picks out the lawyer and says, "That's the person that robbed me." So that led to a dismissal of the charges. But there have been some crazy stories in the courtroom like that. You don't expect the victim to pick out a lawyer as the perpetrator.
Didn't you have like a crazy judge in the Bronx?
Well, there have been.
Oh, you can't possibly expect him to answer that question and
Oh, yeah,
have that
not while-
memorialized.
I'm thinking who's retired.
Well, I don't have
I'll
that
share.
many-
I'll share one of my funnier stories, having worked in the DA's office. So, police officers very often will attribute a statement to someone that they've arrested to try to prove that the defendant had committed the offense. There was an individual who was accused of exposing themselves on a bright sunny day over the summer. And the statement that was contained in the criminal court complaint by this defendant was, "I was just trying to get a butt tan." And that
kidding me?
story has really stuck with me.
That's a good one.
Oh, I had one where the client was not at court, and I called because the judge was going to issue a warrant, and I said, "Where are you?" And she said, "I'm at a pool." And I'm like, "Well, you have to come here like within the next half hour." The judge is kind of pissed, so she came only wearing her bikini, and the judge was very, very upset.
I would imagine.
Why is a bikini not court appropriate?
Depends on the judge, but not for this judge.
Elliot, didn't you have a client that came to court with a T-shirt that said cocaine on it?
I had that. Yeah, that is true. But there's been other one. I'm trying to think of some.
I hope he wasn't charged with a drug offense. I think that if we're discussing wardrobe or malfunctions with wardrobes, I think COVID was a very interesting time when very often my clients. So during COVID, when you were ready to have a case called before the court, there were not specific times that were set. You would log in at 9 a.m. and the court would arbitrarily call cases. And so clients were literally logged in at 9 o'clock, and very often sitting there until about 12:30 in the afternoon. And certainly they had to go about their day and make themselves breakfast or get dressed or even take a shower. And very often I've had clients when they say, "Oh, Mr. Smith, are you there?" You would see the shower curtain get pulled back, and Mr. Smith would be there in all of his glory.
That's amazing. Well, I don't have pants on right now. Well, I do, but they're sweatpants. And that's,
Thank you for
that's
sharing that.
That's something that, happened after COVID with everything being by video. But I'm really kidding. I'm wearing a dress. What about your average DUI? Do you guys cover that stuff, or it's...
We both do. Do you have any specific?
Sure. Well,
questions?
let me ask you this: what are your thoughts on a DUI? Right? You don't specialize in this type of practice, but as a human being and someone who is potentially on the road with someone who is alleged to have been drinking to the point of intoxication, how do you feel about it?
I feel that in this day and age with Ubers and Lyfts, absolutely nobody should be getting behind the wheel. There's just no reason for it.
And what about for those who say, "I'm not in a financial position to hire an Uber or a Lyft"?
I would say, how'd you buy those drinks?
Or how did you get the car?
Yes, good question. But, I have voiced to my brother, what would happen to me, being like 105 pounds, if I have 2 drinks, while I may not feel drunk, I worry that if I had gotten pulled over for speeding or whatever it was, like I'd be in jail that night. And here in Florida, I believe you have the option not to take the breathalyzer. I don't think they just haul you off to jail like New York. I could be wrong, though.
Well, I don't think they have a central booking system in Florida, right? And so I think that what they'll do very often is they bring you back to the precinct and then you post a bond and they give you a ticket to come back to court within a week or two, correct?
No idea, because thankfully I've never been in that position. I would call Elliot right away, but in New York, if I'm not mistaken, if you refuse a breathalyzer, you are going to jail?
Well, you're going to lose your license for a year.
Right. So whether you blow into a breathalyzer or not, I guess we're coming full circle to what I was saying before. If a police officer simply believes that you're intoxicated at the time that he's observed you operating a motor vehicle, he can arrest you. Based on his observations alone, that is enough, at least in the state of New York, to make an arrest. If you refuse to blow into what's called an intoxilizer machine at the precinct, then in addition to a criminal case where you are subject to losing your liberty, the Department of Motor Vehicles in the state of New York opens up a separate case, completely independent from the criminal case. And the punishment there is that you could lose your driving privileges for 1 full year, regardless of whatever penalties are imposed by the criminal court.
So you could win the case, and nevertheless, let's say 6 months into it, you win, a jury finds you not guilty, your license is still suspended for that year.
Yeah, that seems pretty harsh. I wonder if it actually has had the effect of reducing drunk driving in New York.
It's a good question.
I don't know. I would like to say that I wish that the fact that this is a crime and that people face jail time if they were found guilty, that would pose a deterrent for most people. I don't know. There have been campaigns advocating, not driving while intoxicated for years. And people, thousands of people every year are still arrested for this.
Elliot, is there any particular charge that you will not represent someone for? Like, let's say, child molestation or something, or do you take it all?
Not particularly. And in fact, I've had cases where someone was charged, let's say child molestation, where it turned out the person was absolutely innocent. So I try not to be like the judge and make a decision. Are they guilty? Are they not guilty? So no, I've definitely had people that were 100% innocent on a variety of charges, including sex offenses.
Jason, how about you?
I,
Do you draw the
think,
line?
I think the way you really have to answer that question is the same way that I explain it to my children and my children's friends. And I'm sure that Elliot will agree with me that we are not only representing an individual client on any particular case, but we are representing the laws as guaranteed within the Constitution. So in terms of representing someone, you are essentially holding the police and the district attorney's office to their burden of collecting evidence the right way, preserving evidence, and ensuring a fair prosecution. And like I had said before, if you communicate that to the client that, hey, I'm not a magician, but I am going to make sure that if the district attorney's office doesn't have the evidence to convict you, that I'm going to do my best to ensure that you are not convicted, right? That they have realistic expectations. And again, that's what we are doing. We are simply holding the district attorney's office to their burden of proving the case.
Okay. What about all the baby oil at P. Diddy's house and the guns, you know?
Allegedly. Unless you were there and you saw it. I have yet to be invited to one of those.
No freak-offs for me either. Never been invited. But that's once the FBI is involved, is that outside the scope of what you guys do? Do either of you do federal?
I do not do federal. I mean, I have and I'm capable of doing it, but my practice generally or almost exclusively are state cases. I think Jason may be the same.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I've handled a few federal cases. I enjoy the state level practice a lot more. I unfortunately can't weigh in on what occurred during those freak-offs, but it's definitely an interesting story to follow in the press.
How do you guys feel about the Menendez brothers? You think they did enough time?
I do. Jason, have you heard of them?
I have heard of them. I remember hearing about them when I was in high school when the incident or when the crimes were first committed. And I recently watched the Netflix
So good.
show on it. Listen, the actors were incredible. I thought it was really well done. I think it really comes down to what do you believe justice is, right? If you believe in rehabilitation, then you can take the approach that they've done enough time, that they have been punished, and hopefully they are now rehabilitated enough where they can become productive members of society. You know, would I worry that they would break into my home and kill me for no apparent reason? No. I think like most murders, it was a crime that was committed against someone that was known. And whether or not there are underlying events that cause that, I mean, only they know that.
Well, I think there was a cousin that corroborated it.
I heard that there was new evidence. I haven't familiarized myself with it enough to really weigh in.
You should consider doing so.
Can
Well,
you guys comment?
I guess it also raises the question, Elliot. What's your thought on the death penalty?
I'm against the death penalty.
I'm against the death penalty too.
That's
because I believe in rehabilitation, but I think it's all commensurate with the amount of time and what the offense was and what information is gleaned at the parole board and what have you done
I mean,
since being incarcerated to better yourself.
and life without parole is no picnic. I mean,
Do you think Pete Diddy will ever see the light of day?
I do not. How about you, Jason?
I really don't know enough. I don't know what the evidence is or how the federal government really intends to prove it. I don't think as much information as there is right now, I don't think the public really knows anything about what evidence they plan to introduce.
Right, but in that same vein, it's probably way worse, I think, than the public knows. They probably have many witnesses that are going to say he either drugged them or they saw him drug other people and sexually
Well, there's
assault.
apparently videos, so
Right. No, I think he's in a world of trouble, and I
Well,
believe-
doesn't this also beg the question that we think that there is evidence, but none of us really know what that evidence is? And so you might ask yourself, well, how is you an attorney? How can you defend P. Diddy, aside from getting paid probably an exorbitant amount of money? The issue is we don't know what the evidence is.
Correct, but we know that he was indicted, so there is evidence that a grand jury reviewed and thought it was sufficient. And they did say they recovered machine guns and other illegal items from his home. I have trouble believing that.
Were those also covered in baby oil?
The FBI planted the weapons, but again, anything is possible.
Well, I don't know how closely you guys followed the shooting at the high school that happened in my town here in Parkland, but the shooter actually did not get the death penalty. So I just want you to weigh in. You feel that he can be rehabilitated, someone that murdered 17 people at a high school?
I think that anyone who undertakes something so horrific must have had something going on in their lives at that time that led them to that action. Hopefully, while serving an extremely long period of time in prison, they will get whatever help they need, whatever help, will allow them to become rehabilitated. Whether or not they can be remains to be seen, but I do not believe in the death penalty. But I fortunately did not know anyone who, was attending the Parkland school at that time.
And Elliot, you also don't think that shooter...
Well, first of all, it's not as if he's getting out. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he got life without parole.
I think you're right. But he gets to live, though.
No, that is true. But even if he had gotten the death penalty, he's living for 20 plus years while that gets litigated. And it was up to a jury. I mean, Florida has the death penalty, and a juror apparently decided they were not going to go forward with that. So what more could you ask for? I mean, the case was presented to a jury. They made a decision. I don't know in Florida if it has to be unanimous or exactly what the rules are, but someone decided after hearing the mitigation that he should not get the death penalty, so he'll live his life in jail knowing he will never get out. That, to me is a miserable existence.
I think to many, serving the remainder of your life in prison is potentially worse than death. And to some, that might be a deterrence.
Rikers Island, how bad is that place?
Really bad.
Absolutely horrible.
Like really, really bad. Like the movies.
Like maybe worse. Like cuttings, stabbings, all the time. Drugs, weapons, fights.
There are so many cases where people are arrested from inside of Rikers Island with contraband, weapons, drugs, unimaginable things, that there is an entire unit dedicated to prosecuting these crimes within the Bronx District Attorney's Office.
Just for Rikers.
Yep, and we're not talking about like fights. Like fights are going to happen. I'm talking about people being slashed across their face, slashed in their eyes. I mean, bad cases. Guards, their noses being broken, or guards beating on inmates. I mean, the place is terrible.
There are even cases where guards are arrested for helping to bring these items into the facility.
Scary place. All I know is I went to court with Elliot once in the Bronx, and I said, I'm never coming back here. I'm not built for this. I really appreciate you guys coming on. Congrats on your first podcast, Elliot.
Thank you, and the pleasure was ours. We've been looking forward to this day for months.
And if somebody should be listening and they know someone in New York who needs a criminal attorney, where can they find you guys?
Well, we're located in the same space. Just don't come knocking on the door.
The website is kdefense.com.
That's KAYDENSE.com. kdefense.com. And Jason?
And mine is arrestedinny.com.
arrestedinny.com. Awesome. I could talk to you guys forever because I find these stories fascinating, very different from my world of work injuries. But then again, if I lose a trial, my clients, they just might not get a medical bill paid. They're not going to spend life in prison. How do you burn off the stress? I think, Elliot, you run. But, Jason, what do you do to get all this?
To my understanding,
if you're trying to get me to discuss my bowling league, we can dedicate an entire other podcast session to this.
Is that for real?
That's what I was going
Bowling
with.
and golf for me, and the gym.
All right. And Elliot running and hockey?
But let me just briefly say that Jason is not only a bowler, but he and his bowling team have matching shirts, and they are glorious.
Yeah, they're powder blue sweater shirts.
They sound very preppy. Does it say arrested in New York on the back?
No, it has our team name on the back.
I tell Elliot when he runs the marathon, he's got to put K Defense on the shirt. I mean, someone watching that marathon or running surely needs
Listen,
a criminal
to his credit, though, any extra weight that he's then carrying during those 26 miles has to be brutal.
It's 26.2, but you wouldn't know that. Okay, big sister.
Yeah, real quickly, give me one word to describe your style as you relate to your clients. Jason, go.
Passionate.
Elliot?
Understanding.
All right, very good. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Success of a Hot Mess. If you loved what you heard today, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a beat. And hey, sharing is caring. Share this podcast with your friends, family, and anyone who could use a dose of inspiration. Until next time, keep rocking those hot mess moments with style and grace. Cheers.